When the German army surged across the Soviet border in June of 1941, confidence was. Commanders believed the entire campaign would last only a few weeks, maybe a couple of months at most. What they walked into instead was something far more merciless than any army. One of the coldest, most unforgiving winters in recorded history. Temperatures didn't just drop, they collapsed. -20, -30, then -40 degrees Celsius and below. Engines froze solid, fuel thickened into gel. Lubricants turned to glue, reflux made breath crystallized on collars, and tens of thousands of soldiers, poorly clothed, poorly equipped, and utterly unprepared, found themselves fighting not a military opponent, but the brutal force of nature itself. By November, the German High Command finally realized a terrible truth. This was no longer a campaign of blitzkrieg, it was a war of endurance. A war of survival. German uniforms, designed for mild European weather, were almost useless here. The greatcoats were thin. Boots had no insulation. Gloves were scarce. Soldiers described the cold not as a temperature, but as an enemy, an invisible attacker that crept into their bones and stole their strength. Frostbite spread through the ranks faster than bullets could. Fingers blackened. Toes died. Men collapsed simply because their bodies could not produce heat fast enough to keep them alive. But in that desperation, something remarkable happened. Improvisation. German troops began adapting in any way they could. They wrapped rags, newspapers, even pages torn from manuals around their feet to trap warm air inside their boots. Some stuffed their clothing with straw, dry grass, or horsehair, primitive methods of insulation that actually mirrored what we now know from modern survival science. Even sleep became a tactical operation. They dug shallow pits, lined them with straw or pine needles, and covered themselves with tarps to block the wind. Fires were dangerous. They revealed positions so heat came instead from the earth and from shared body warmth. Whatever kept them alive, they used it. As the weeks passed, German soldiers started studying the real experts of the Russian winter. The locals, peasants and partisans who had lived through endless winters, knew secrets shaped over centuries. They layered wool, linen, and fur. They ate high-fat meal's lard, potatoes, fermented foods fuel that released energy over long hours in the cold. Germans quickly grasped why their rations weren't enough. They needed fat. They needed calories. They needed the kind of food that kept a body burning from the inside. And then there were the behavioral lessons of rhythm, of pacing. Locals moved slowly. They avoided sweating. They stayed dry at all costs. German soldiers learned the hard way that a single moment of sweat could freeze into death minutes later. So they slowed their marches, controlled their breathing, worked with the winter instead of against it. This wasn't strategy anymore, it was survival. Shelter 2 became a battlefield. With tents frozen stiff and vehicles frozen solid, troops sought protection anywhere they could find it. Barns, abandoned huts, muddy dugouts. They sealed cracks with clay and straw. They burned trash, furniture, even ammunition boxers for heat when no wood was available. One clever trick, recorded in survivor journals, was the earth-heated bed. They dug a pit, lit a fire inside, let the soil absorb the warmth, then covered it and slept above the heated ground, a primitive but effective underfloor heating system that today as survivalists still study. When fuel ran out, they made lamps from animal fat. A tin can, a rag, and a handful of grease could burn for hours, providing not only heat but something arguably even more important: hope. Every item became multi-purpose. Helmets melted snow for drinking water. Boot grease prevented frostbite. Cloth strips were wrapped around rifles to stop freezing. Snow itself became a cleaning tool, rubbed on hands and metal to remove grime without wasting precious water. But the most powerful survival tool of all wasn't physical. It was psychological. Modern survival experts still say it: the mind is your greatest weapon, and the men who lasted the longest weren't always the strongest or the best equipped. They were the ones who accepted reality first. The ones who stopped waiting for rescue or resupply and instead adapted. They scrounged. They shared. They copied the locals. They conserved every resource as if their lives depended on it because they did. By the end of that first Russian winter, the German army had lost hundreds of thousands of men, not just to bullets and shells, but to hunger, exposure, and the relentless cold. Yet those who survived became living textbooks of winter warfare. Their improvised techniques, layering, insulation, pacing, high-fat diets, ground heating were later studied and integrated into military doctrine across the world. Today, these lessons live on not only in NATO training but in modern survival schools and Arctic expeditions, because the truth is timeless. Survival isn't about equipment. It isn't about strength. It's about adaptation. Whether you're a prepper, a winter camper, or a student of history, the core lesson remains the same. Knowledge is the ultimate insulation. The same wisdom that kept soldiers alive on the frozen steppes of 1941 can protect you in any cold weather emergency today. If you found this deep dive into wartime survival valuable, be sure to subscribe. In the Beginning continues to uncover the forgotten methods and raw field wisdom that kept ordinary soldiers alive under extraordinary conditions, just as relevant now as it was 8 decades ago.